Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hyperspace on Dark Matter Radio Network. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and a special thank you to webmaster and producer Keith Rowland. And my special guest this evening is Bob Nelson. And after a childhood marked by deprivation and abuse, Nelson married his high school sweetheart and became a TV repairman. Chancing upon a book, The Prospect of Immortality changed his life's trajectory. He became fascinated by cryonics, a process in which the body temperature is lowered during the beginning of the dying process to keep the brain intact, and then stored in liquid nitrogen. The ultimate goal is to reanimate the patient at a later date, when a cure for his or her disease has been discovered. Working in coalition with a biophysicist, in 1967, Nelson orchestrated the freezing of Dr. James Bedford, the first human to be placed in cryonic suspension. Soon thereafter, he began freezing others who sought his help, obtaining special capsules and an underground vault. At the height of his influence, Nelson was featured in Life magazine and told his story on various TV and radio programs. But as he learned the hard way, freezing people is not easy. At least keeping them frozen was not. He froze 3 of his CSC associates, 2 of whom had no money. He also froze a 7-year-old boy, an 8-year-old French-Canadian girl, and several others. A series of financial and technological obstacles led to tragic results. Despite dipping into his own savings and taking extraordinary and very controversial measures to keep his patients in a frozen state, his patients were lost, and Nelson found himself on the losing side of a $500,000 lawsuit. Quote, I aimed high and flew high, believing that the wonder of preserved life was within my grasp, unquote, Nelson says, but I fell hard and far. I spent the next 25 years in self-imposed exile from cryonics. I was largely silent and allowed other people to vilify me. I haven't told my full story to correct history until now. Through those years, I had an incredible journey. No one else can tell this story. Bob Nelson was the founder and president of the First Cryonic Society of California. He froze the first man in 1967 and was an electronics repairman for many years. He is now retired and lives in San Diego County. His book's available on Amazon.com called Freezing People is Not Easy, My Adventures in Cryonics, and I think that's been out since March of 2014, I believe. Please welcome Bob to the show this evening. Hi, Bob.
Hey, how are you? A pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome. It's nice to hear your voice. Yeah. What a fascinating path. That's incredible.
Yeah, it is. It was then, and it still is. It's been 50 years since we froze the first man, Dr. Bedford, and the changes and the advancements that have happened in that time is just spectacular, and exactly what we anticipated. And we have many different successes in low temperature biology to speak of today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly has grown quite a bit. So how did you get involved in this whole cryonic thing? What pulled you into that?
Well, I read Dr. Rettinger's book, The Prospect of Immortality. And basically, his theory was based on a fact and an assumption. The fact that we can today take a human being and freeze the body all the way down to minus 320 degrees below zero. That would be liquid nitrogen, would be the refrigerant. And at that temperature, there is no biological change whatsoever. So, and the assumption is that once we get a patient in suspension, that at some point in the future, science will advance and medicine will advance, and in some cases, some people conceivably could be reanimated. Mm-hmm. And the first criticism that we received is, well, who would want to? Most people die when they're old, and who would want to come back? An old man and with all the aches and pains that go with it, Mm-hmm. But we make it clear that the people that are in suspension today, there are about 300 people in cryonic suspension today, 150 at the Alcor Foundation in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where the Dr. Bedford, the first man, is maintained, and another 150 at the Cryonic Institute in Michigan. And for myself, I have made all the arrangements to be placed in cryonic suspension. But most people also add the instructions that don't bring me back unless you can rejuvenate me and make me healthy, make me younger, and some people even say a little better looking.
Mm-hmm. Right? They need a robot an android.
Yeah. But yeah, the first criticism from the American Cryobiology Society, which is the experts in this field, was that there wasn't really any optimism that it would ever be possible to revive a frozen human being because not even an organ, animal or human, had ever been frozen and successfully revived. And that was their criticism. But just a few years ago, Dr. Greg Fahey, who was an early, as a high school young man, a cryonics member, and he became a cryobiologist, and he froze the kidney of a rabbit. So he was the very first person that froze an organ. And Bob Ettinger then said, well, they said the reason they didn't believe it because no organ had been frozen. So now the chances must be better. They should say it. And that's probably the most optimistic reason we have to believe that at some point in time, we're going to be able to suspend the human being and bring him back. At the time I read Dr. Ettinger's book, I was a little bit, I was very, very excited because he's a brilliant author. He's a pure logical physicist. And the reason that I hesitated was because I had never seen or envisioned anything, insect or anything, being suspended and come back. But today I could sit here for an hour and name examples. The one that I like the most is the Siberian salamander, which is like a lizard-like animal, maybe about 8 inches in length. And this animal routinely, normally, freezes in the winter in a solid block of ice sometimes, and can stay frozen for up to 10 years. And then when it melts, this little creature just simply goes on its way looking for something to eat or looking for a mate. And there's the African lungfish, which is about a 2-foot long fish that lives in Lake Tanganyika in Africa. And National Geographic did a wonderful documentary on this that you can, you can dial it up and watch it yourself. The lake, every 5 years, it evaporates. And when this process begins, these fish burrow down into the mud, they secrete a gelatin over their body, and they go into what's called estivation, which is the opposite of hibernation, because hibernation is triggered by cold. Estivation is triggered by heat and dryness. And these animals then go into a reduced metabolism state, and they too can stay in this condition for up to 5-6 years until the lake replenishes itself. And here's a good example. I grew up in Boston. Where do you think all the insects go every winter in the freezing cold winters? The trillions of insects. They go into a suspended state. And as I say, I could go on with example after example.
Right.
But that's how I became hooked. The first thing that I saw that suspended, it was kind of funny. I was with my daughter. It's probably a couple of years after I read the book, and I was in a pet shop, and hanging on the counter was a little card with little packets of what like sugar come in, little paper packets, and it said sea monkeys. Just pour them in water and watch them come to life. And I went, what? I took them home. The family, we got around the tank and put it in and waited. We didn't see nothing. And I'm thinking, An hour later, here they were, little fish swimming around. And this is something that, they're still available today. And now that was a very tiny, minuscule example, but it was life. It was life suspended, for years and years. Just put them in water, and boom, they come to life.
That's fascinating.
So the concept of suspending life, suspending animation, is absolutely normal. It's nature's gift to life, and there's so many examples of it. So what we're doing with cryonic suspension is simply stopping the dying process the moment it's legally possible, and that is in this country, if a person is dying, the moment his heart stops, if the doctor is right there and says, "I pronounce you dead," then we can go ahead with the freezing process, which is what we did with Dr. Bedford.
Mm-hmm.
But with Dr. Bedford, oh my God, what a situation we had here. We had gathered a scientific advisory board. This is back in 1966, and we had a very wealthy lady by the name of Stella Gramer, who lived right next door to Marilyn Monroe, and she became like a second mother to me. And she owned several buildings in Westwood, and she was a true believer also in Ettinger's book. She gave us a suite of 7 offices for 3 years at no charge.
Wow.
So we had beautiful offices, beautiful location, and I had a scientific advisory board to be proud of, and a gentleman by the name of Robert Perhoda, who was a profoundly successful author. And his book at the time that was on the market was Suspended Animation. So we were in the office working one day, writing research proposals, and the phone rang, and it was the Bedford, the Gilmore mortuary from Glendale, and this guy was just a nervous wreck. He's saying, "Please, I've got some guy here who wants to freeze his father. I have no idea what he's talking about. He must be nuts, and he won't leave, you know." So I said, "Well, put him on the phone," and I talked to him. He said, "Look, my dad is a professor of psychology. He's a brilliant man. He wants to be frozen. I don't know why, but whatever his wishes are, I want it done." So anyway, I said, "Well, let's get together tomorrow morning at Perhoda's house." I called Bob Ettinger, and he, oh my God, he was so excited. He said, "Once we freeze the first man, this science will get on the road." Mm-hmm. And he said, "He's a perfect example, Bob. You've got to do it." And I said, "If we do, the scientific advisory board has told me they will resign." And he said, "So what? We'll get another scientific advisory board." Anyway, that's what happened. We announced that we were going to freeze Dr. Bedford, and they all resigned because at that time, it was very, very controversial. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we set up the suspension, and I got to talk to Dr. Bedford 2 days before he passed away, and just one time. And I came in, took his hand, held his hand, and he said, "Mr. Nelson," he said, "I want you to know I don't have any real hope that I will ever be brought back." He said, "But I have such profound faith in this science that I want to go ahead and be the first man." And he said, in hopes that maybe my children can benefit from it. Certainly my grandchildren will. And I said, "I can't agree with you more." And he left $300,000 for his suspension, which, oh my God, that would have been such a gift because we were broke. And then the doctor, Dr. Abel, who was the doctor that pronounced him dead, he was very, very, very frightened of any publicity. So we had to promise to keep his name out of it. Then after we got Dr. Bedford frozen, we had him in a wooden styrofoam container that was filled with dry ice. Mm-hmm. And I was under the assumption that his son would have the mortuary pick the container up and do whatever he wanted to do with it. The only option really was to send his dad to Phoenix, Arizona, to the CryoCare Equipment Company, who at that time were making capsules for human suspension. Mm. But after, it just seems silly right now that we didn't get this clear, but after Dr. Bedford was frozen, I called his son. I said, okay, he's at this is the nursing home he was at, and you'll have to pick him up. He said, pick him up? I don't know. Where am I going to put him? And I went, oh, my God, well, we don't have any facility. So here we are with a frozen man and no place to put him, no doctors, no morticians, no one really that would, well, there just weren't any facilities for this. This was so new. So anyway, Prohoda, the author, he said, well, I think we could bring him to my garage, and it was going to take CryoCare Equipment Company 2 weeks to complete the building of Dr. Bedford's capsule. So we loaded him in my pickup truck, and we took him to Prohoda's garage, which was in Encino, California. And the next morning, about 8 o'clock, I get a call from Prohoda, and he was a nervous wreck. His wife was screaming, get that frozen man out of my garage. I'm going to call the police. And, oh, my God. So here we are. And again, no place to put him. And I had at that time a couple of friends, dear people, that lived in Topanga Canyon, and they were sort of hippies, I guess you might call them. And I called the wife, Sandra Stanley, who actually helped me write my first book, We Froze the First Man. And I told her the dilemma we were in. I said, Sandra, we have no place to put him. And she said, well, what the hell are friends for? Bring him on up here. So we loaded him in my pickup truck and drove all through the Topanga Canyon with this big container in the back of my car with smoke coming out of it from the dry ice.
Wow.
And we kept him there for 2 weeks. And then I had to go back and load him back in my pickup truck, down through the windy curves, all through Topanga Canyon, about 25 miles into the San Fernando Valley to Balboa Park. And the hearse from was there to take Dr. Bedford to Arizona. And that was a strange moment, because here I am with the first man ever frozen in the back of my pickup truck, going through this crazy road, and I'm in Balboa Park, and here people are playing ball and going for walks, and no one paid any attention.
Wow.
So we met up with the hearse and transferred him, and that was the end of my involvement with Dr. Bedford's freezing. What happened was Dr. Abel, the general practitioner, when he heard there was $300,000 available, he buddied up with Dr. Bedford's son, and they never even paid for the material and the work that we did to freeze his father. But I don't know. I don't know what happened after that. Eventually, after I think about 10 years, they ran out of money. And the Alcor Foundation was kind enough and smart enough to, since he was the first man frozen, to take the responsibility to maintain him, and that's where he is, at Alcor in Phoenix, Arizona. And incidentally, Alcor and both CI, Cryonic Institute in Highland Park, Michigan, offer free tours of their facilities, and you know, it's a very, very fascinating opportunity to see how actually these facilities are in existence, and how many patients they have. And in Cryonic Institute, they have great big giant white capsules, and they have 8 or 10 people in each capsule.
My goodness.
And yeah, and they have a capsule outside in the back of their building. I don't know how many hundreds of gallons of liquid nitrogen it contains, but it feeds all of their capsules for their 150 people. And they have the cost down by using the system that it costs them about $100 a year per patient.
Goodness.
Yeah, so they really got the science and the ability to do a good job. And
yeah, it sounds like.
Yeah, they're both really fascinating examples of today's technology.
They certainly are. So when do they decide to reanimate a patient? At what point do they try to do that, or are they still just going to?
Well, it's going to be a gradual process. Mm-hmm. Before they take, the person that's in solid state liquid nitrogen, that's going to be the toughest battle right there. Mm-hmm. Before that, they're going to, which is where we are right now, they're going to hibernate people before they solid state freeze them. And at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle, Washington, some of the most exciting research that I cannot believe in my lifetime is actually going on. Dr. Mark Roth has discovered a chemical, hydrogen sulfate, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the CNA medical correspondent, he came out with a book recently called Cheating Death. I just recommend everybody to read it. And you will have to rethink how you look at death and the dying process because, one of the things about medicine is the medical world demands conservative about everything in medicine. And I think that's a good practice. But Dr. Sanjay Gupta, I don't know how he does it, but he gets away with it. He went there in his chapter on this subject. He went to the Cancer Institute, and they took a white rat, which is a non-hibernator, and they put him in a 20-gallon fish tank, empty, and they pumped in a little bit of hydrogen sulfate, and this animal immediately went into hibernation. Its heartbeat went from 200 beats a minute to 2 or 3 beats a minute. By all medical criteria, it was in the stages of clinical death, the first stage of death. Every human being or animal or anything alive goes through these stages. And as Dr. Gupta puts it, death is not like a light switch, on-off. It's like a line in the sand that is continuously shifting. And this rat, as I say, immediately went into hibernation, and they kept it in this death-like state for hours. And then by removing the chemical from the tank, almost immediately the rat recovered and was perfect. This is so amazing that DARPA, that's the Department of Energy, that does some of the most far-out research. It's a government office.
Right, DARPA, yeah. They gave Dr. Roth $10 million to continue on with this research and see if we can get it to the point where they can hibernate a human being, because their goal is during wars, Americans die mostly because they're shot on the battlefield and they bleed out, and they have what they call the golden hour. The most that usually an injured, shot, wounded patient, soldier can live is about an hour. But if we could buy more time, like 6 or 7 hours, we'd have enough time to stop the bleeding, to get them moved to a hospital, and to treat them and to save them. Right.
And so that's what DARPA is hoping for, to be able to, if a soldier is shot, to get a medic to him, give him an injection, put him in the hibernation, and then you can take 24, 36 hours to get him to a hospital. And what a life-saving technique. And so they're carrying on human hibernation trials today as we speak.
It's fascinating. That's ideal for space travel,
Yeah.
Long distance.
That's what got me initially. The reason, when I went to the first, let me back up here a little bit. When I after I read Dr. Ettinger's book and after I saw the sea monkeys, now I'm interested. I want to know more. And one day I was driving home from work on the freeway, and the disc jockey came on after playing. He was playing a Tony Bennett song, "If I Rule the World," and he said, "Hey, haven't you people out there? Any of you who don't want to die, you want to live forever? There's a meeting of the Life Extension Society at Helen Klein's house," and he gave the phone number. So I couldn't believe it. I called, got the address, and then I thought, you know what? There's going to be scientists and doctors there. They're not even going to let me in. But I had to try. So I drove it was on Elsinore Street in Los Angeles. I knock on the door, and a sweet little old lady opens the door, Helen Klein. She happened to be the third person that we froze. And I was invited in, but because of my fascination with astronomy and wanting to be able to discover some suspended animation means, because if we ever go even to the closest planet, Mars, we need to put them to sleep. We can't send a big enough life support system to take them there and back. Mm-hmm. But if we could hibernate them, all those problems are solved. So anyway, there was about 25, 30 people there, and we all talked, and it turned out I know more about suspended animation than anyone in the room, and I got elected president. So, oh my God, that's how I got deeply involved, because then I went to my dear lady friend and told her what I did is I bought 3 books, and I gave them to 3 people that I thought were extremely intelligent. Mrs. Gramer was one of them. Paul Picassi, who was an executive at McDonnell Douglas, and some dear, dear friends of mine who I just respected. All 3 people read the book and said, "Where do we sign up? It's a great idea. We're all for it." Mm-hmm. And so then Mrs. Gramer, as I say, gave us a suite of offices, and we were off. We froze the first man. Actually, we froze the first man, the first woman, and the first child.
Wow.
And my problem was I made a lot of mistakes. I couldn't say no. Like Helen Klein, the lady that had the first meeting, she was dying of cancer, and she died about a year later, and pleaded, for the society to help her. Mm-hmm. And so I froze her. I mean, we already had one person in suspension in dry ice and temporary storage. That was Marie Sweet. She was the first woman frozen. So we had her in dry ice, and it didn't cost any more to put another patient in that same container. That was Helen Klein. Mm-hmm. And then one of the other people, who was the historian of cryonics, Russ Stanley, he passed away, and he left $10,000. But that wasn't anywhere near enough. But it was enough for us to buy a vault on a cemetery. Mm. And let me tell you, that was a Herculean task, because every cemetery I talked to thought I was like a flying saucer watcher. And it wouldn't have anything to do with me. But the Oakwood Memorial Park in Chatsworth was a very, very, Frank Enderly was the owner at that time. And he listened very carefully, and he said, why not? They're all going to be underground in a vault. They're all going to be dead. Mm-hmm. Whether you can revive them or not, or anyone can in the future, no one knows. So it ain't going to hurt anything. And he looked at it that way, and that's exactly the way it turned out. And when we finally did have to end the experiment because of lack of funds, we had nine frozen people at that point. They simply stayed in the vault, and they were just like every other interred patient at Oakwood Memorial Park. Mm-hmm. And I took a lot of criticism for not keeping them frozen, but boy, I'll tell you, I don't back down from that from anybody. I say to people when they say to me, I failed. I say, what did you do? What did you do? We put out appeal after appeal for some help, financial help. The only two people that ever gave a nickel was Robert Ettinger. He gave $100 twice, and Helen Klein, the lady I was just talking about, she gave $100. So that was $300. That's the only money that, other than Russ Stanley's $10,000, which was used up when we bought the land, when we built the vault, and we went on for like 7 years before we finally had to wrap it up.
Right. Well, it's kind of like trial by fire, considering you guys were the pioneers behind this. I mean, nobody else was doing it.
Yeah, and as I say, my mistake was I couldn't say no. And today, boy, they learned from my lesson. If you got to have the money in front, or they won't do it. And it's a heartache, but there's no Santa Claus,
Right. Well, what do they charge for something like that to put you on ice?
The Cryonic Institute is where I made my arrangements, and God, they're so reasonable. The total cost is $28,000.
Gosh.
That gets you processed. That gets you in a capsule, and that gets you taken care of in liquid nitrogen in perpetuity. Because that $28,000, they invest it, and believe me, they earn a lot more than $100 a year. And Alcor, on the other hand, they charge $150,000.
Wow.
And I'm not sure why so much, but they are doing an enormous amount of research. And the other thing that Alcor does that CI does not do, Alcor has a philosophy that in the future they will be able to clone an organ or even a whole body. But so they offer, I think it's $50,000. They will freeze just your head.
Oh man.
Yeah, and then they'll clone you a new body, and that's very, very bad PR because that's what Bob Ettinger always said is no, we're not going to do that at CI, and so everybody there is. Yeah, and that's why I want to be there.
I think that's wise.
I don't want to have my head frozen in the
Well, this just sounds funny to me. It almost reminds me of Frankenstein or something. And then you know what kind of body they're going to clone for you anyway. But that's fascinating. I mean, to me, this is such a sci-fi thing that's happening right here on this timeline. You don't hear much about it either. So
there's 3 people that have come out front, celebrities. There's many celebrities that have made arrangements, but most of them want it anonymous. But Simon Cowell is one, and of course the most vocal is Larry King.
Yeah.
Larry King had after he retired, he had a 1-hour show. He didn't tell what the topic was, and he had I think about 7 or 8 other celebrities, and they were sitting around the table, and he said, "Well, I want to announce something." He said, "I'm going to be frozen." And he said, I think, he says, "I don't believe in any religion, and I believe in science." And one of the people at the table said, "But Larry, you'll come back, and all your friends will be gone." And Larry said, "Well, so what? I'll make new friends."
Oh, funny.
And the other person is Paris Hilton. She has announced that her intention to be suspended.
That's fascinating. So what do you think happens? Okay, so when somebody transfers out, when they die, at the time of their death, it has to be when the heart stops. That's technically when you put them into this.
Well, it doesn't have to be, but it ideally, if you're going to be frozen, I think you want to bring your body in suspension in the very best biological condition you can do, and that would be to be right there when your heart stops. Because that's the beginning of clinical death. That's the clinical death is the stage of death that is possible to be revived from. The next stage, which is biological death, is the stage that we don't know how to revive a person, but we can transplant the organs. They're all good. They're alive. So the person is a little bit dead and a little bit alive. You'd rather be suspended in clinical death, but biological death is still acceptable. The final stages of death is cellular death, which is when the body is decaying.
Mm-hmm.
And my own personal belief is I want to be clinically dead when they begin the process.
Right.
There are people, some very reputable people that believe that all they need to do is just take a sample of the body, and they'll be able to clone a person from the body.
Right. Yeah. That would make sense.
But they say that won't be the person with all the memories that you have. Well, I don't know.
Interesting.
For me, it's better than being put in the furnace.
Right. Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting point you bring up. So I'm wondering what happens to the brain at the time of putting this person into a stasis, so to speak. I mean, what do you think is going to happen to the brain? Obviously, if the heart's stopped, but the brain still works. It's still electrical, right? So it's still working. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's what you got to take a look at. Thank God we still allow this procedure to be performed, in the early stage of clinical death. But this point that Sanjay Gupta makes, that death is not a light switch; it's a line in the sand that keeps shifting. Let me give you 3 quick examples of what he's talking about. My first was Armando Sicados. He was a young 19-year-old boy in Cuba who hated Cuba and he wanted to get out of there. And so for years, he watched the different planes at the airport near where he lived. And he finally figured out a plan where he could hide in some bushes, and once a week, a big plane would come down the end of the runway, wait about 10 minutes, and then take off. And he planned on hiding in the wheel well and getting out of that country. And he did. But he got in the wheel well, and when the plane came, he ran across with a friend. He got in one wheel, and his friend got in the other. And he climbed up in the wheel well, and he didn't realize that at 39,000 feet, which is where this plane travels, the outside temperature is minus 40. And he had on a T-shirt. He didn't realize that the air pressure was so low that it could not sustain life.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, they climbed into the wheel well. They got up in the air. The wheel well light in the cockpit didn't show that the wheel wells closed properly. Armando was absolutely crushed initially, but when they opened the wheel well again, it gave him a chance to maneuver and tie himself to the brace of the wheel. And the other boy on the other side fell out. Landed in Madrid, Spain, 8 hours later. The passengers disembarked. As the pilot got off the plane, he saw Armando fall from the wheel well onto the pavement, and they rushed medical there, and they pronounced him dead. So they were taking him to the morgue, and all of a sudden they heard him moan. Took him to the hospital. He's alive today. He's a dear friend of mine. That's one.
Wow.
So here's a person who was how did he survive? Well, the medical community went nuts over how could he possibly have stayed alive under those conditions. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, this just happened recently with another young man that went to Hawaii. Did you hear about him?
No.
Yeah, big news. His mother he came from Africa and he wanted to find his mom, and he climbed in the wheel well of the plane, and we went to, it took 5 hours. He was fine.
Wow.
He's alive today. Anyway, the next thing that's fascinating was a lady from Norway. She was skiing with a bunch of her colleagues. She was worked for the hospital and was going to be a doctor. And she was skiing. She went across a riverbed, and the ice broke. She fell in. She got stuck in there, and they couldn't pull her out. Took them 3 hours. 3 hours to remove her from that cold prison. Mm-hmm. And it took months and months for her, but she lived. Now, how does a person live underwater for 3 hours?
Right.
The cold that was killing her is what saved her.
Mm.
It lowered the biological clock, the need for oxygen. And then the final and most unbelievable one is, this has been all over the news and Reader's Digest, and is in Japan, a man worked for some corporation. They were having a party at the president's house in the mountains, and they were partying it up, and this man got so drunk that he walked outside to try to clear his head a little bit, and he walked a little bit down the path, and it was snowing, very, very heavy, and he slid and fell down the side of this mountain, and he was covered up, and they couldn't find him. They looked for like 3-4 days, and they don't, no one knew what happened to him. 24 days later, he was discovered under the snowbank, alive.
My goodness.
And he gives lectures all over. Now he's become very famous. 24 days.
My goodness, what about frostbite? Yeah, no kidding.
You can't live without water for more than 7 days.
My goodness.
So the point I'm making here is that when is the ideal time to begin a cryonic suspension? The ideal time is the moment the heart stops beating. When is it too late? Well, we don't know. But my personal opinion is if I'm in cellular death, if I'm beginning to decay, don't continue on for me. But there are people that say if I'm in a plane crash and you can find anything on a rock, scrape it off and freeze it. So the opinions here are all over the place.
It's fascinating. It really is. So can you go into detail insofar as what perfusion is and how that's performed?
Yeah. Well, under ideal conditions, the patient would be on an operating room table, and they would have an iron heart, which is a machine that does external cardiac massage. We had this for the first man, Dr. Bedford, and it's like a plunger that presses his breastbone and causes the blood to circulate physically. At the same time, oxygen is provided to try to oxygenate the blood, and to try to keep the organisms and the organs getting some oxygenation. And as you're lowering the temperature, you want to lower that temperature as fast as you can. So the patient is packed on ice, in ice, around ice, as the external cardiac massage continues. And at the same time, an incision is made into the carotid artery. And the objective here is to drain the blood and replace it with a chemical, biological antifreeze like dimethyl sulfoxide is probably the very best, or glycerol. And it's a cold liquid that's like a biological antifreeze. And so that it protects, to some extent, the organs and the body as the temperature goes lower and lower. And after maybe an hour and a half in regular ice cold water treatment, it then gets over to a slush of water and dry ice, and anyway gradually lower and lower and lower, and then of course once you get below 30 degrees, things ordinarily would freeze. But if you have a cryoprotective agent perfused in the body can go much lower before freezing. And then the temporary stage of dry ice, which is like 186 degrees, minus 186 degrees, is perfectly adequate for maintaining the body and moving it to a location where you've got a capsule and you've got liquid nitrogen. And what's going on now at these facilities, the Cryonic Institute in Elkhor, they very carefully, 1 degree at a time, lower the temperature. Their exact procedures and techniques, I don't know. But it involves pretty much, ice, a slush solution, dry ice. Then they spray liquid nitrogen and control it so that the temperature goes down, I think it's 1 degree per hour. And that preserves the biological tissue as best we can. And again, as I say, the assumption is that at some point in time in the future, they will have a perfected procedure whereby they can freeze and resuscitate a human being.
It's fascinating. It really is. When I think about the reanimation process, I'm wondering, do they use a synthetic blood at that point because they've taken out all the original blood?
Well, that's easily replaced. They just find out what kind of blood they got it. They can get that, or they probably will have a synthetic blood by then, or even it's certainly possible or conceivable that the patient's blood could be saved and frozen and stored.
Right.
I need to bone up myself on what they're doing because they're always changing. And Elkhor has produced some very amazing documentaries on this procedure. And another thing that I would recommend your listeners do is go online and dial up Elkhor and take a look at their scientific advisory board. I mean, it'll knock you out. Same with the CI. They are scientists, doctors, professionals from all walks of life. When I think of freezing the first man, we didn't even have a mortuary that would cooperate with us. And I felt a little bit, strange doing this myself, but Bob Ettinger's logic and thesis and cooperation is where I put my heart and my mind, and I'm very glad and thankful that I did.
Oh, me too. Yeah, right there on the front lines of all this. It's amazing how far they've come, and who knows where they're going to be another 50 to 100 years. That's another thing, being reanimated to say 100 years from now, what's the world going to be like, And I'm also wondering, do you think there will be any brain damage pertaining to the person being, animated or reanimated?
Well, I think there will be probably, and again, this is just conjecture, but I think there will be in the first few people, but they will, it's trial and error.
Right.
And I remember in December of 1967, I was sitting at home on a beanbag with my little daughter in my lap, and we were watching television. And all of a sudden, the TV went off and a bulletin came, urgent bulletin ahead. And said, oh, my God. So then I went to the next station, and it was every station had this bulletin. I thought, oh, my God, we must be at war. That's what I thought. And then it announced that the world had just performed the world's first heart transplant in Cape Town, Africa. Well, I remember over the next 2 or 3 years, the criticism and the controversy, and people, oh my God, especially from the religious world. This is the principal seat of a human being, and blah, 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 and it's wrong, and it's against God. And, today we have a vice president that has a transplanted heart. Today, the heart is no big deal. So...
well, there certainly are. Yeah, they're making leaps and bounds without a doubt. But I know there's a comment. I don't know if this was mentioned in something you mentioned, but do you consider death a disease in its own?
Do I consider death a disease? Yeah, I do. Because, for example, according to recorded history, if you go back 10,000 years to the caveman day, the average life of the caveman were in their 20s. Today, it's in their 80s. That's like a big leap. I mean, if we could go back, and we actually can, because in New Guinea and several other islands, there are places where people still live in caves. But if you could talk to a caveman, do you think you could interest him in maybe skydiving or going on a submarine ride or an organ transplant? I mean, it's like a different world.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as death itself being a disease, yeah, I on October 5th of this month, I went into a convulsion at 2:00 in the morning. It scared the life out of my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped breathing. Thank God we had a house guest at that time. It was a lady who was a Marine, and she was trained in CPR, and she performed CPR for me till the ambulance came. Took me to the hospital. I spent a week in the hospital. I had another convulsion while I was there. The ambulance driver told my wife if she hadn't performed CPR, I wouldn't be here.
Wow.
What I needed was a pacemaker. Well, I'm telling you, this pacemaker took me for the past 2-3 years. I mean, I felt like an old man. I got no energy. I feel like a kid again.
Oh, that's great.
Because my heartbeat was as low as 15 beats a minute when it should be 60.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's 61 every time I check it. And so I'm getting twice, maybe 3 times, the oxygenation and the blood circulation that I was getting before.
Wow, that's wonderful.
So, yeah, I consider that was a disease.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I've got a dear friend that, has told me many times, hey, if I go in the hospital, don't give me nothing. I'm ready to go. But I would bet you that if he was in a situation where something was threatening his life and the medical treatment was there to save it, he would want to save it.
Mm-hmm.
We're products of our environment, and the one thing that's so amazing about people is that people don't like change.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the main reasons that cryonics has had such a hard time. All of these new amazing cloning, and it's just unnatural until it becomes natural.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I had an interesting 2 interesting stories. One is about an old man that CNN evidently got a lead on this story, and they sent a camera crew outside of his house because every day he would come out and work for about 2 hours in his garden. And they put the camera on. Here's this old man, and he's picking up 50 pounds of gravel and moving it and digging, and oh my God, doing the work of a young man. So the camera came in on his property and said, Mr. Watson, my God, how do you're so strong and healthy and doing so, how do you stay in such good shape? How old are you? He says, well, I'm 87. And he says, well, how do you stay in such good shape? And he says, well, I don't know. Why don't we go in the house and ask my mother? His mother was 113, and she was the oldest woman alive in California at that point.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and then the other story was I have a daughter who has multiple sclerosis, and I took her, it was probably a year ago, to one of her doctor appointments. And we're sitting in the doctor's office for a long time. There's nobody there, and in comes this old man. So we're sitting there eyeball to eyeball, and he said hello, and then he said to me, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I write. He said, oh, what do you write about? I said, about cryonics. What's that? Well, so we get into cryonics. And I tell him, he's dying of cancer, this man. I said, have you given any idea to extended life, to cryonics? And he thought about it. He goes, no, not for me. And I said, why not? And he gave me what I think is the most perfect answer for not being interested in cryonics. I said, why not? You know, you're here at the doctor's office trying to cure yourself. You know, why not? He said, no, because she's gone. And wherever she is where I want to be. So he made a good point.
Certainly did. Yeah, and that leads me to wonder how many people actually plan on this as families to go into a cryonic suspension.
That's a good question. A lot of people. We did a. Oh my God, this is probably 40 years ago. We did a poll. I got 8 people to volunteer. We went to Beverly Boulevard in Wilshire, right there in Beverly Hills, because I figured most of the people there were financially sound. And we did a question about cryonics and extended life and and so on, and I asked people if they would consider cryonic suspension for themselves or their family. And the bottom line, the results were 72% of the people said no, they didn't care if it was already a perfected science. They wanted nothing to do with it. And now I guarantee you that it would be the other way around if people were in the hospital facing death.
Right.
At that point in time, most people would say, do whatever. And I don't want to die. So it's again back to change. And I think a big part of what people face is the spiritual beliefs. I belong to the Self-Realization Fellowship in Encinitas. And it's an organization that embraces Christianity, Judaism, Muslim, everything. And it just says, whatever you come here and show respect for the Creator, whatever you deem Him to be. And but so many people, there are 1,200 religions that we know of. And they're all different. So, can they all be right?
Right.
For me, I think just being a good person, and as far as my, my embracing a Creator, if you want to call Him God, that's okay with me. But I just firmly believe that there is some form of a Creator that not 100% clear, but it doesn't have to be. I think just being good and giving respect to whatever that creation is. I don't have to claim to know everything, And
right.
So I think cryonics is just. I mean, look. If we perfect cryonic suspension, just like the heart transplant, you can't possibly think we outslicked God.
Right.
That He didn't want us to know, but we outslicked Him. No, it's a gift from creation. Just like all medicine is a gift from creation. The fact that 5 years ago I was again very close to death. I had a blocked carotid artery, and they gave me three months at most to live. In 2012, I had a 3 by 5 inch cancerous tumor removed.
Wow.
And no sign of any more cancer in the. And then the most amazing thing, for the past 4 years, I have been suffering with a hip, and to the point where I was in a wheelchair and a walker, and the pain was just absolutely almost unbearable. And I had a new hip put in. Now I can run.
Nice.
No pain, no pain. I mean, I'm out of the wheelchair, out of the walker, and so I'm a testament to the miracle of science, and I think that's what extended life is all about, and I think that's what cryonics is all about.
I tend to agree with you on that one. And with that being said, we're going to head for a break real quick. We'll be right back. Stay tuned, everybody. Dark Matter Radio. Welcome back, everybody, to Dark Matter Radio Network, and this is Hyperspace, and I'm Solaris BlueRaven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Bob Nelson. Bob, you with me?
I'm here.
Excellent. What a pleasure it is to have you on. I'm so enjoying this conversation.
Oh, thank you so kindly.
It's fascinating.
Would it be possible for me to share an event that's coming up on November 15th?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. We have the annual get-together for the people that are involved in life suspension, not only just cryonics, but other aspects of transplant and so on. And on the 15th of November at the Colony Clubhouse in Newport Beach, they're going to have a get-together, and I'll be there, and all of the VIPs in the cryonics world will be there. Let me give you the phone number. It's 310-528-4712. And it's called the Super Longevity Holiday Party and Cryo Feast.
Nice.
So it'll be fun if you can make it.
That's great. And how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to get in touch with you and contact you personally?
They can call me on my cell phone, which is 760-583-6700.
Okay. Excellent. And also your book is on Amazon.com?
It's on Amazon.com, exactly.
That's wonderful.
And it's going to be made into a movie.
Great.
On the back cover of the book, Paul Rudd is going to be playing me. What an honor, my God. And Kristen Wiig is scheduled to play my ex-wife. And Christopher Walken is going to play Bob Ettinger.
Excellent.
And Owen Wilson is going to play the Joe Clockheather, the mortician.
That's going to be great.
And the other part of the story that let me just touch on a little bit is after the facility had to close because of lack of funds. I mean, my wife divorced me. I always had a beautiful Porsche Speedster, which today is like worth probably at least $100,000. I got sued by someone that was frozen by the Cryonic Society of New York. It was a lady that I had never met, never heard of, and they found out that Joe Clockheather had malpractice insurance, and that's what I guess people that have malpractice insurance, their target.
Right.
And so Joe Clockheather was sued, and I was sued, and by an attorney who represented this lady from New York. I never had anything to do with the freezing of her mother. I never met her or any of them. Anyway, the attorney that they hired was an attorney that had, I think it was polio, and he was on crutches. Brilliant attorney. As much as I was angry at him, he was brilliant, and he presented to the jury that the concept that I was acting as like I was trying to take Jesus Christ's place, and that I could bring back the dead. I could bring back anybody, he said. All I needed was your money. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And that's the one thing I never got from anybody.
Right.
Anyway, and then I had an attorney. I had to sell my Porsche, and he was a good attorney, but during the trial, 3 times he fell asleep. He was a manic depressive, and he was taking lithium without telling me. And so anyway, the jury bought the whole thing, and because Joe Clockheather had malpractice insurance, we got a $400,000 judgment against each one of us.
Wow.
And so I was taking it to appeal, and during the appealing process, their attorney very wisely contacted my attorney and said, "Look, we'll drop the $400,000 that Mr. Elson was judgment if you allow us the right to sue your attorney and recover whatever money we can because of his behavior." Anyway, I said, okay. I was so angry at my attorney anyway, and he settled with them for I think it was $20,000. And boy, I tell you, I still shake my head at that. That's why when I walked out of that courtroom after that judgment, I couldn't believe life. After all I had done and tried to do, and to try to say that I'm trying to take over Jesus Christ's position. Oh, but it's all about money.
Yeah, it seems so.
And anyway,
that's too bad. That stuff has to happen.
Another interesting point that I'd like to mention is that when we had the cryonics office up and running, this is before we got the call to freeze the first man. I got a call from Walt Disney Studio, from a secretary of apparently Mr. Disney, and she said she was speaking on behalf of their president and didn't say his name, but I'm sure that's what it had to be. And they wanted to know how many people were frozen, who our scientific advisory board was, and where our facilities were that the frozen patients were maintained. And I had to tell her, we don't have a scientific advisory. We don't even have a doctor, and we don't have any patients frozen, and we don't have a facility. And that was the end of that. But because of that phone call, my God, the rumor keeps going on that Walt Disney was frozen. Right, yeah, that's what I hear. Yeah, and no, he wasn't. Not to my knowledge, unless somebody else did it and kept it a secret. But they did inquire. I say that. And what's intriguing is it's possible that a man of his stature and caliber, he could have hired anybody in the world. Money was no problem. And money is so important. So important. Anyway. It makes me wonder, like Michael Jackson, for example, why did they put him in a stasis of some kind? You would have thought they would have done that, Well, I am told that Michael Jackson and Elizabeth Taylor both visited Alcor. Interesting. And I thought, oh my God, they're going to make arrangements to be frozen. But to my knowledge, they weren't. But so many of these people want secrecy. They don't want that information to be public. So it's possible. Yeah, I think it is. I would love to know the other celebrities that have made arrangements. Well, I tend to think there are quite a few, and I'm sure it hasn't been exposed, but that's just my own impression anyway. Yeah. Well, I have it secretly that there are a number. I don't know who they are, but they have quite a few. One other thing I might mention, there's going to be a cryonics conference in Laughlin, Nevada. That'd be on the 5th of November, and until I think it's the 9th, the 4-day conference, in which every leader in cryonics will be there giving talks and presentations. And Don Laughlin, who Laughlin, Nevada is named after. I know Laughlin is a miniature Las Vegas. It's a gambling city. And Don Laughlin is going to be given a paper. And he is made also arrangements to be suspended. And it's very cute because he always, whenever he talks, is saying, yep, I'm Don Laughlin. You've got a gambling city named after me, and I'm going to be frozen, and I'm no gambler. So funny. Yeah, wow. That is funny. Well, I guess it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just a preference thing at this point. But I find it interesting, say they regenerate someone and they come back to a very different modern world, or maybe it goes in the other direction. Who knows? But one thing is for sure, you have the history of where you've been. Hopefully those memories are maintained so that when you do awaken to the next level or wherever you are in this world, you'll be able to relay that like a historian. What do you think? Yeah, I think that would be great and be nice. But for me personally, I don't find it terribly horrible that I won't remember everything. Yeah, would you rather be erased? No, I'd rather. I like to remember what I can, but even today, there's so many things in my early life that I can't remember. Right. Yeah. So what? I don't. It's not really that important to me. What's important to me is my family. And what's interesting is that my two daughters, Christine, she's 22, and my younger daughter is 19, and they're both sympathetic to cryonics, but they also are in that category of people that they don't want to talk about death. They don't want to think about it. Yeah. And to talk about cryonics, it's like, You
Do you
know,
think it's a fear-based thing? Do you think it's people have a fear of death and the transition?
yeah, I think it is, and I think that's what happens with the world is that when people are faced, like I remember my mom telling me when I was about 7 or 8 that I was going to die and be buried. Oh my God, I just couldn't believe it. I hated it.
Mm.
But most people deal with that through religion.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they get saved. Religion is going to save me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which religion? Muslim, Islam, Catholicism, Judaism, or Hinduism? Well, all of them. You know, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
They need to know something else is beyond the veil, you know.
Yeah,
For sure. But the death experience, I would think the death experience with this type of thing, with cryonics, would be different than a regular transition. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But it seems to me like it might be. What do you think?
I don't get the point of your question.
Well, I'm
Give
trying to
me.
think. Insofar as like when say some people have near-death experiences when they go into the death cycle. Um,
Right, right.
So I'm thinking to myself, I'm wondering if putting them in the cryonics will change that type of experience so that it's not in any form or design related. What do you think? Do you think it
Hmm.
would be different, or do you think they would go through a death cycle experience even through the cryonics?
Well, um, I think it gives a great deal of comfort
Mm-hmm.
to go through cryonics, in that there is some hope that that it's not all over, that you're going to be back,
Mm-hmm.
and that for me is what I like is I want to see the future. You go back just a few hundred years ago. My God, I was watching a movie last night, and it was back in the early 1800s, and they didn't have any plumbing, they didn't have any electricity, and they didn't have any cars, and everyone rode horses, and that's beautiful. I mean, I think it's beautiful. You go back a couple of hundred years before that, and they didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the future is exciting. One other thing that is amazing to me. Have you heard about Brooke Greenberg?
Mm-mm.
Google Brooke Greenberg, your audience and yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you will absolutely be goosebumps, because this is a young girl who is the daughter. I believe her dad is a doctor, I think it's in Rhode Island. She just passed away, but she's one of four daughters, and the picture that's online is the three daughters holding Brooke, who is about, I would say, two, maybe 2.5, possibly 3, but closer to 2, I think. And in this picture, she's 18 years old,
Mm.
but she looks 2 or 3, and she has some kind of a biological anomaly that does not allow her to age.
Mm-hmm.
She 2 or 3 in every respect, mentally, physically, her dad and her sisters love her, and say that she's absolutely perfectly normal in every respect. But could she be the first immortal? I
Mm.
mean, until she died, because she died at 23. She was still 2 or 3 years old
Mm.
biologically.
It's amazing.
Amazing, and this again has been on National Geographic, and but Google, Google Brooke Greenberg,
Mm-hmm.
and read the story, and it absolutely, what it says to me is there's so much about science that we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there's a
I
lot
have
that's covert too. There's a lot that's in the underground that they don't talk about as well.
exactly, yeah. My first book, We Froze the First Man, of course, it was about the story of freezing the first man. And that, too, was optioned to be made into a movie by a gentleman by the name of Bill Cannon. And he had done a couple of other movies. And I always shake my head when I think of this story. We were having lunch one day, and he was asking me if I had, this again is like 35 years ago. He asked me if I had heard what I thought about cloning. And I said, I'd never heard of it. And he told me what it was. And, you could take a specimen of tissue and make a new whatever out of it. And I remember sort of chastising him, telling him, Bill, I'm into cryonics because it's real. I'm not a saucer watcher, and don't tell me about cloning. That's so ridiculously nonsense. And here I'm chastising him, and then here a few years later, Dolly the sheep is cloned.
Right. Yeah.
So here I am, one of the world's biggest optimists. Matter of fact, I gave a talk at an optimist club once, and when I was done, they said, boy, we really know what an optimist is now.
That's funny. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, they've come a long way, and of course there's the artificial intelligence, and that makes me wonder where artificial intelligence plays its role with cryonics. I'm thinking that they might try to interface the brain with artificial intelligence upon regenerating a patient.
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that's just so much. I think it's an infinite thing where anything goes. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they can come up with just about any solution.
You take, by way of example, go back 50 years to when we froze the first man, and take a look in 50 years where we are today. What developments, the cell phone,
right.
Computer. I mean, there's so much transplants. There's so much amazing science and technology that has blossomed. Can there be any doubt that this is, this is going to continue?
Right. Yeah. You're still talking immortality. I mean, this is really what it boils down to is the immortality of what they're doing with cryonics.
Yeah, it is, and I personally think we're going to see very, very soon perfected methods of hibernation, and then the next phase will be what's called supercooling, which is what the Japanese man in the mountains who was 24 days in a snowbank, what he experienced. It's called supercooling. It's bringing the body temperature down so close to death that it's microscopically close to it, but it's not death. And also the skier in Norway. She still works at that hospital. She never made it to a doctor, but she is a technician at that hospital today. She had a little bit of tremble in her hands, but other than that, she's alive and well.
It's fascinating. So did they get a little bit of frostbite and tissue damage? I would assume, right?
A little bit, yeah.
But not a whole lot. Yeah, that's always a concern, I would say, when you're trying to preserve the body through that process, right? Yeah.
Well, that's what Alcor, I think, has been very, very productive in controlling that, and it's very, very critical that the freezing go down along with the cryoprotective agents to keep the biological damage to a minimum.
Right. And these facilities that are available right now, are they privatized?
I'm sorry?
Are the facilities that they have for cryonics today, are they privatized? Are they owned by private investors or?
I believe they're nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
That, but who actually I know in Elcor, I believe it's actually directed by Saul Kent. He has put on several conferences in Florida, and he's really a prime mover in cryonics. And he has quite a history with him, as he was part of the life extension group in California, and then his mother died, and he was the first one to perform a head-only suspension, and there was some accusations that the mother was decapitated before she was dead, and he was arrested. And when he went to court, all the charges were dropped. But he is one of the prime movers in the freezing the head only, which, as I say, is not acceptable to myself and a lot of other people.
Right. Yeah, there's something.
But it may well be biologically and medically sound. Their arguments are very, very reasonable, but as I say, it's the PR that bothers me.
I agree. It reminds me, I don't know if you ever watched Futurama. There was an episode where they had heads in fish tanks, but I guess they were their version of cryonics. But anyways, that's what it reminds me of, literally. But what happens? So is it the same process if they disconnect the head only, and is it the same process, the way they would put them in that type of cryonics?
Yeah, it's much easier to control the cooling of the head, because they discard the body,
right,
and they just connect up to the carotid artery and perfuse the cryoprotective agent through the head, and then very slowly, 1 degree an hour, lower the temperature, and that biologically is by far the best mechanism for freezing that we know of, or we believe today. Right. But what the final solution for being able to resuscitate a human being is going to be, we don't know yet. We're getting close.
You certainly are. Well, it reminds me of cyborgs, when you start just taking the head, who knows what else is going to happen after that. But I find it very interesting. This is like I said, it reminds me of science fiction. It's incredible, and yet it's going on right now. And of course, you don't hear much about it. Now, I haven't heard a whole lot about this. Advertised, whether
it's something that does not lend itself to popular demand. Again, there's something taboo about the subject of death, and that's changing. I gave a talk, Sunday, to a group in Los Angeles, and for the editor for Chris Nichols was the organizer. And there was about it took place in a private theater, beautiful little theater. There were about 80 people there, and this is the first talk I've given in many years. And I was really stunned by the optimism of the group. There was not one critical, argumentative situation where years before, man, you would be fighting and arguing and being chastised, and all these people were just absolutely fascinated. And that's what I think it takes. It takes time for people to get used to become accustomed to, heart transplants is the very best example I can give.
Right.
For extended life, it's going to happen. And we just lost my wife's sister. She had a liver transplant at the Ronald Reagan Hospital in Westwood, and I was stunned to see on the floor that she was on, they had 2 gigantic, futuristic operating rooms. This floor was just for transplants, and she received the liver of she had hepatitis, and she relieved the liver of a 24-year-old man. And oh my God, after that transplant, she was wonderful. But then all of a sudden, some unknown factor happened, and she passed away.
Interesting.
But again, the change in the medical world. Just read Dr. Sanjay Gupta's book, Cheating Death, and you will have a real clear picture of where we've come from, where we are, and where we're going.
Right. So how many years do you think a patient can stay in cryonic suspension? Is there a limit at all?
Well, there is if we're talking about hibernation. If we're talking about liquid nitrogen suspension, no, there's time ceased to exist.
Amazing.
Dr. James Bedford was the freezing process began less than 1 minute after the doctor pronounced him dead. And so by the time we got him cooled down, he might have been, 2 or 3 minutes into the dying process, but he was still in clinical death. And clinical death is the state that we can be resuscitated. And so for him, time does not exist.
Right. It's amazing. It's very fascinating, without a doubt. It's just very incredible, this whole thing. So, did you have the bodies were actually wrapped? Are they still being wrapped in Mylar? I know there was
yes, they are, and that's basically to keep when you put the patient in the second phase of cooling, which is dry ice, to keep the dry ice from making contact with the skin because it burns. So if you use Mylar, it tends to dissipate the cold over a larger area, and I think it's just a simple remedy to limit that.
Yeah, it seemed like it. Yeah. What about animals? Have you ever heard about animals going into the cryonics?
Well, other than the different the different examples that I gave you, for example, as the woolly bear caterpillar, which to me is just fascinating. Again, you can Google this and they'll show you a video of it. This is a caterpillar. It's about 2 inches in length, and it has to eat a certain amount to get a certain size before it mutates into a butterfly. And the first year, it's nowhere near enough. And this is again in Alaska somewhere, and so it freezes, and I mean freezes down to minus 40. And they do. National Geographic does such a wonderful video. You know the quality of their documentaries. So here they show you at 1 year this insect frozen for about 8 months. Then it warms up and boom, it just shakes a little bit and it crawls off and starts eating again for the next 2-3 months. And then boom, comes the winter again, and then anyway, it goes through 8 to 10 years. And then at the end, when it's big enough, it builds a cocoon, and then it transforms into a butterfly. And again, there's so many different. Here's one thing I think that's very exciting that your audience can do. Go outside and catch some flies alive. What I do, I have a big glass coffee table outside. I take a banana and I just lay it in the middle of the table, a banana, just a little smudge about an inch in diameter, and I put it on the table, and then I get a clear plastic glass and I hold it near the banana and be real still, and then a fly will get on it, and then boom, I come down with the glass and trap it. and I've done this many times. And when I usually get a half a dozen or 10, I close the bottom of the glass up, and they're all flying around in there. And I put it in the coldest part of the refrigerator. And it's out of a few hours, they all die. They're all on their back with their feet up in the air. And I leave them in there for a few days. Mm-hmm. And, they're dead. You shake them. And then you take them outside in the sun and put them in your hand and count slowly to 10, and then they'll all come to and fly away.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And again, it's just another example of, of reduced metabolism, of suspended animation, mm-hmm. and it's the normal blessing from the Creator that enables so many different living creatures. Fish are another good example. Mm-hmm. A lot of fish get frozen solid,
right,
in blocks of ice, and
mm-hmm.
and the bear, we've all known for years, does something very close to hibernation, but it's not quite hibernation, because in hibernation, the physiology of the animal is it's really in a very reduced state, and it takes maybe a couple of hours to come out of it. But a bear can wake up in just a couple of minutes and come after you, But it just shows how the different levels of reduced metabolism are perfected for the species. It's a natural evolutionary process, and it is just amazing, and that I think is what is going on right now at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Institute. He is on the road to perfecting human hibernation, and when human hibernation is perfected and developed and applied, it means you'll go into the hospital, and let's say you've got a cancer that needs organs, and there's so many people that are in this situation right now, and they die because they can't stay alive long enough to get the organs. Mm-hmm. They'll be able to say, okay, you're very close to the end, but we can put you in suspended animation or hibernation until we can get the organs and get ready, or do you want to just go? I guarantee you, in that situation, it's going to be the opposite. There's not going to be 72% of them that say, no, I think I'll just die. There's going to be 72% of them that say, yeah, go ahead, put me to sleep and wake me up.
Exactly, and I guess the factor in that would be finances, if they can afford to have it.
Yeah, that is true, and it depends on your age. Fortunately, I'm old enough that my medical bills are taken care of by Medicare.
Yeah, that's good. I was thinking also, I was talking about family pets too, like if anybody had ever wanted their family pet to be put in.
Oh yeah, Cryonic Institute has, I think they said the last time I heard it, had 23 dogs.
Nice. I'd do that with my dog.
Yeah, you would, huh?
Oh, I love my dog. Yeah, he's family. Yeah. Big time.
Yeah. What kind of dog is it?
He's just a mix. He's like a cattle dog, Great Dane mix. He's just a big goof, but he's precious to me,
Yeah. We have a beagle, and she's the love of the house.
Are you going to put her in suspended animation too?
I really haven't thought about that. She's pretty young.
Is she?
But it'll be a question of money, and can we afford it? But I think my family would all say, yes, do it.
I would think so, yeah. Your little buddy get regenerated with you? That'd be kind of fun, wouldn't it?
But what do you I'd be curious to get your reaction to that question that I asked. Where do all the insects, the trillions of insects, go in the freezing states?
Well, they go into some kind of a stasis of hibernation, I would say underground.
They go into little cracks in tree. Most of them go, I'm told, go into trees. Little cracks and crevices in the houses, and well, when I learned that, I just went, oh my God.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually the wasps do that too, if I'm not mistaken. And I've seen them actually go into like almost like a hibernation if we get colder temperatures up here in the mountains like we do. And then, of course, as soon as it starts to warm up, you see them coming alive. They're coming out of that space. So it's fascinating. Nature is amazing.
It is. And cold is a good thing. As they say, I started out 50 years ago as a real skeptic. And when I've learned how amazing nature is, and our Creator has evolved all of these different techniques and procedures to extend and save life. It doesn't seem that nature favors very much an individual, but a species definitely gets special attention.
I so agree with you on that one. Well, I applaud you for doing the work you've done as one of the pioneers behind all of this. I mean, that's pretty adventurous of you when you think about it. Just doing it, just going by, winging a prayer, pretty much.
Yeah. And I had the precious opportunity of knowing Bob Ettinger. This was a human being that is like an Einstein, And let me share one little story with you. He was 92 when he passed away and was frozen. But I had this was about 4 years ago, I guess. I had just gotten news from my attorney that they had made a deal and they're going to make a movie out of it, and they had paid an option payment to me and told me about Paul Rudd and Christopher Walken, and oh my God, I was so excited I just couldn't wait to tell Bob Ettinger. So the next morning I called, and for the first time ever, he didn't answer his phone. So I called that night. He didn't answer his phone. I called the next morning, didn't answer his phone. Called in, and finally a woman answered the phone. He lives alone. And so I told him I'm Bob Nelson, a close colleague of Bob Ettinger, and I want to talk to him. She said, Bob, he's in a coma. He's very close to the end of his life. And I went, oh my God. And I said, well, look, I just wanted to share this news with him. They're going to make a movie out of my book, and this is who's playing in it. And I said, if he comes to, she said, he's come to a couple of times. Could you please give him this information? So she said, okay. So the next day, I get an email from his son, and it said, Bob, Dad passed away this morning, but he did regain consciousness, and we told him about your book and about the movie, and he smiled, his very last smile.
Nice. That's wonderful.
Oh, my God. Brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah, that's really sweet. So I guess he didn't want to go into the suspended animation.
No, he did. He was suspended.
Oh, he was suspended. Okay, great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, he got a perfect suspension. Because that's where the facility is. He's the one that started that facility. The first person that was frozen at the Cryonic Institute was his mother.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. His father didn't want to be frozen.
That's interesting.
But yeah.
That's great. Well, you'll be meeting up with him at some point, I suspect.
Yeah. When I visited I've been there about 4 times. The second time I was there, they were getting ready to have a luncheon, and I walked in, and there was a real pretty lady, blonde-haired lady, and she had her arms wrapped around this, well, not around it because the capsule was so huge, but she had her head up against it and her arms hugging it, and I heard her say, I'm here, darling, I'm here, and I've made all the arrangements. I'll be in there with you one day. I love you, I love you. Oh, my God, I couldn't believe it. That was just absolutely right out of the movie.
Really? So what happens with funerals? Is there any kind of funeral that happens before they go into cryonics?
Well, interesting that you asked that. One of the women that we froze was from Des Moines, Iowa, was Mildred Harris. And we went out there, and we had to find a mortuary that would cooperate, and we brought our mortician with us, and they gave him an open possibility there to do whatever we needed to do. And so we froze her and flew her back to our facility here at the Chatsworth. And they didn't have enough money to put her in a capsule, but they paid $10,000, and that took care of the suspension and took care of replacing dry ice for, well, as I say, this point that I'm talking about, we were about 2 years. And I got a phone call from her son, and there had never been a funeral or anything like that, and the family was a little bit upset about that, and they wanted to have a memorial service. So Dennis Harris was his name, and he asked me, Bob, is there any way that we could have a service? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, can you take her out of the container for just like an hour or so? So I talked with Joe Clockether, and I'm an electronics engineer, so I had skills in that area. So I developed a spray system in a casket. They had to buy a casket, and we had a spray system in the lid, so that about every half hour we would close it, and it would spray and keep her cold. And so we took her out of the container, put her in a casket, put her in one of the funeral rooms, and about 15 people from Des Moines, Iowa came, and the boys did her makeup and put a wig on. She looked absolutely gorgeous, and it was absolutely a beautiful, beautiful memorial service. The family got up and spoke, and they all looked at her, and then they left, and we put her back in her container, and so. But it cost them $10,000 to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure it was worth it.
Yeah,
and
I thought, my goodness, this is something that if it were known, I think a lot of people, a lot of, like, if a wife loses the husband, maybe once every 5 years to have a memorial service, and do it not for reanimation, but just for the convenience of seeing the loved one and having a memorial service, and then being laid to rest together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I do think it needs to be advertised more. I guess it's really not the word, but definitely I think it needs to be talked about a little bit more, because I don't hear a whole lot about it, and I do think a lot of people would be interested. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I've never heard of it being done other than that one time, but it was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah,
I was really, really surprised.
right. So when people are in cryonic suspension, are they technically dead? It seems to me like they're still living in some way.
Well, they're I like to put it this way: they're a little bit dead and a little bit alive. Mm-hmm. They're legally dead,
right?
And they're biologically in suspension. Mm-hmm. Now that means that they're not dead,
right?
But they're not alive. They're just in between.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. Now next month on the 15th, I'm doing a radio show with a law review that is going to be very interesting, because a lot of these issues, like when is a person dead, and we always worry that at some point in time the legislation is going to say, well, the person's alive. Really, biologically, the person is alive. Just because the heart stops beating doesn't mean you're dead.
Right. Yeah.
But for our purposes, thank goodness, it does legally mean you're dead. Mm-hmm. So you're legally dead, but medically alive.
Wow, that's interesting. So has a patient ever awakened from a cryonic suspension?
Not that I know of, because once the heart starts beating, there have been several cases where they're right there, ready to perform it, because the person is in the dying process, and they're ready, and then boom, the heart starts beating again, and they got to come back the next day.
Interesting.
Because you cannot do anything until you've got that signed signature from a medical doctor that this heart is been stilled.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. To me, I find this very, very, very interesting, without a doubt. I still think Michael Jackson's in cryonic suspension, though, just by the way he went out.
I would hope so. I loved his music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just get that vibe. I mean, yeah, I bet you there are a lot of them out there. Boy, that's fascinating, and it makes you wonder where they're going to wind up in the next future. Boy.
Yeah, let me share one other interesting point with you.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was 4 years ago when the group, it was This American Life broadcast. They did an interview. They sent two people out from New York, and they wanted to do an interview with me, and I said okay, and they said it would probably be about 4 hours, 6 hours, something like that, and I, okay, that's a long time, but okay. And a young man and a young lady came out. Sam Shaw was the guy's name, and he was so smooth and articulate and kind and fascinating. We got into the cryonics thing, and they were here 4 days. And one of the things we did at the very end, they wanted to see the vault where it was in Chatsworth, and I hadn't been out there in 20 years. So we went out there and found out that the cemetery had been sold twice. And there were some the family that owned it now were an Indian family, and so we went into the office, and because the lid that I had on it was it was like a slab it was black on a sliding rail, and it went back and forth out of remember the movie 2001?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted for a second there. Yes, I do. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. You remember those monoliths that they had that were floating in the sky? Mm-hmm. I copied that, and that was the door to the vault. I thought that would be imaginative. Anyway, when we got there, it was gone, and the whole place was grassed over, and there were two marble benches, like seats, that were right on top of where the vault was. So we went into the office and said, "What happened to the old, And they said, "What are you talking about?" We said, "Cryonics." They said, "We never heard of cryonics." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Well, here, I own that vault." I said, "And here's the name of the people who were in it." And they looked in their charts, and they said, "We don't have any of those people here."
Oh, no.
We never heard of them. We don't know what you're talking about. Please leave. So wow. I couldn't believe it. So Sam Shaw and his lady went back, and they went in, and they hassled and argued for another hour. And they absolutely denied any knowledge and insisted that it was at another cemetery, not there. And we said, well, why then? All around there, every inch, there's a marker where someone is buried, except for the exact circumference of where the vault is. And why have you put those marble benches right on top of the opening of the vault? And they just pleaded them. We don't know what you're talking about.
That's a shame. That's really weird. And I want to, at this point, we're getting ready to wrap this up here, so I do want to thank you so much, Bob, for being on tonight. This has been an incredible interview. And I hope to have you back soon. This is just
Oh,
awesome.
I love it. Anytime, please.
Good. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to interview you, by the way. And I know you have so much more information to share with everybody. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I just want to ask you, Bob, when is the movie coming out?
Well, they haven't even started it yet. And
Okay.
what they tell me, it takes on average 6 years from the time they write the screenplay and they do the movie, and it's been 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping within the next year they'll begin filming. But
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Avatar took 10 years to do.
Right. Some of those do take a while.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And once again, I do want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. And also, make sure you all stay tuned for Dr. J coming up next on his Researcher on a Mission, of course, on Dark Matter Radio Network. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with tonight, Bob? Anything? Say somebody's on the fence about this whole thing. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, I would just say that that the science of life extension is an ever-changing phenomenon. And you just consider that early man lived 20 years, and today the average is 80 years, and that's going to continue in that direction. So be thankful for our Creator and enjoy life and enjoy an extended life.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Excuse me. And do you know how much they charge for the dogs or the cats being into cryonic suspension?
I think it was $2,000 to $3,000, depending on the size of the dog.
Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, no, not for for perpetuity, forever.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Right. Well, what about your family? Are they going to go into cryonic suspension with you?
Well, my wife. It's so funny when we first got married, I didn't tell her anything about cryonics, and my wife is from Cambodia, so she hadn't been here very long, and after about 2 years, I gave the only interview to the Cryonic Society to give my side of the story, what happened. And so I had to tell her before these people, the interviewers, came to the house, and I told her about cryonics, and she would, for the next 4 or 5 years, she would say to me, "Honey, I know one freeze. And I would laugh and say, "Okay, I'm not going to freeze you. Don't worry."
And Bob, we're getting ready to get out of here real quick. I hate to finish.
But anyway, she about a year ago, she told me, "Honey, I won't freeze."
Excellent. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Bob.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween.